Mercy was never a gift in border country. It was a ledger entry, granted when fear stayed quiet and revoked the moment grief needed a body to carry it. Astrid Valewood had spent 7 years learning how to hold shaking wolves through fever, how to close torn flesh with steady hands, how to speak to mothers in the hour between labor and panic. None of that mattered once the Luna lost her child. Skill became suspicion. Devotion became motive. By the time the moon reached its highest point, the same hall where Astrid had mixed winter tonics for half the pack echoed with one verdict alone. Someone must pay, and the easiest name to carve into blame was hers. The iron bit first at her wrists, then deeper when two guards hauled her across the flagstones. Silver had been hammered into the inner cuff, thin as wire and vicious as frostbite. Each jolt sent a bright ache up her forearms and into her shoulders until her fingers cramped around empty air. She tasted salt and old smoke, heard boots scuffing as pack members stepped back from her path as though sickness rode in her shadow. She was alone with Luna Morel before the bleeding, Elder Caro said from the raised dais, voice trembling with righteousness and fear. No witness, no second healer, no record that can be trusted. Astrid lifted her head despite the chain pulling her chin down. Her hair, still stiff with dried medicinal paste from the infirmary, clung to her throat. I gave her cramp bark and willow infusion, the same dose as every difficult first trimester. I charted everything. A woman near the front spat at her feet. Liar. Another voice, sharp and ragged, followed. Curseborn. I always said she carried bad moon luck. Astrid searched faces she knew by scar patterns and habitual limps, wolves whose children she had kept breathing through winter croup, men whose broken ribs she had wrapped while they cried into their own sleeves. She found no one willing to meet her gaze for more than a heartbeat. Not even Tomas, her old apprentice, who stared at the wall behind her like a carved saint avoiding judgment. I did not kill her child, Astrid said, and the sentence came out hoarse but whole. Test the tincture jars. Test the cup. Let me show you the sediment. If wolfsbane touched that brew, it was not by my hand. Murmurs rolled through the hall. Caro lifted both palms for silence. You speak as if this is a hearing. Her laugh broke on the way out, thin and disbelieving. What else would it be? The beta answered from the steps below the dais, avoiding her eyes the way everyone else did. Containment. That word split something colder than fear across her spine. Containment meant no defense, no witness, no appeal to the old laws carved into the boundary stones. It meant panic dressed as procedure. It meant she had already been chosen for the grave, but they preferred clean hands and holy language. Inside her own mind, the noise narrowed into a single line. I am still a healer. I am still who I was this morning. I did not poison her. I did not poison her. If they would just check the jars, if they would hold one breath long enough to think, this can stop now. It has to stop now. But Caro is not listening for truth. He is listening for quiet, for obedience, for the sound of a room forgiving itself. If I kneel, they will call it confession. If I fight, they will call it proof. There is no right posture for the condemned. By the second hour past moonrise, they had dragged her into the smaller chamber where council marks were burned into the beams. No trial torch was lit. No witness bell rang. Caro read the sentence from a strip of hide without looking up. Astrid Valewood, healer by former station, is stripped of pack claim, barred from den and title, and exiled beyond frost line before dawn. Return is death by treaty statute. She's swallowed against a throat gone raw. Former station? Your charts are seized, Beta Relin said. Your herb stores are now council property. That is infirmary stock for winter fevers. Relin's jaw flexed. Not yours anymore. The cruelty of it struck harder than the chains. They were not only discarding her, they were taking her work, her records, her way of proving what had happened. Erasing left no stain if the floor itself was removed. When they shoved her through the pack gates, snow knifed sideways on a brutal wind. Midnight bells from the watchtower had just finished ringing. 2 border guards marched her between them along the ridge trail where black pines bent under ice. Torches spat and guttered. Her boots, thin from infirmary use, soaked through in minutes. Every step ground silver against bone. At the boundary stones, frost had bloomed into pale veins across the carved treaty runes. The guards unclasped the chain linking her wrists and kicked her satchel after her into the drift. It landed open, spilling dried comfrey, a cracked mortar pestle, and 3 folded treatment charts that Wind immediately tried to steal. "Don't," she rasped, dropping to her knees to snatch them. The older guard stamped 1 chart into slush. "No records. You said exile, not theft." The younger one, face half hidden under wolf fur hood, looked briefly ill before hardening. "Walk west until dawn. If you are seen this side after first light, patrol order is shoot on sight." Astrid stared at him, numb with disbelief. "You know me." He looked away. Not anymore. Behind them, a knot of onlookers had followed at a distance despite the storm. Their words blew in fragments. "Baby killer. Should have hanged her. Let the wilds take what she made." Astrid gathered what she could from the snow, fingers failing around wet paper, herbs, and the 1 small knife she had hidden in her boot seam for root cutting. Her palms burned where the silver had opened skin. When she rose, her knees buckled. No one moved to help. She crossed the line alone. No pack land began as silence. No banners, no scent markers from recognized territory. Just old forest, wind, and a white darkness that swallowed depth and distance alike. She tried to count steps to keep panic from sprinting ahead of her body. 50, 100, 200. The wind erased every number by the time she reached it. The breaking point came not in the hall, not at the sentence, but half a mile beyond the stones when a horn sounded behind her, low and predatory, then answered by another farther south. Not warning calls, hunting calls. She turned and saw torchlight moving along the ridge in a loose fan. They were not letting exile stand. They were driving her. Astrid's breath snagged. Her injured wrists throbbed in rhythm with her pulse. She could go north into ravines she did not know and break a leg before dawn. She could turn back and die at the boundary for treaty show. Or she could run west through deadfall and blind drifts and trust instinct over maps. Run. She ran. Branches whipped her cheeks. Snow crust cracked under each step until 1 foot punched through and twisted hard enough to make her cry out. She hauled herself free, tasted copper where she had bitten her tongue, and kept moving. The satchel slapped her hip, lighter now from what she had lost, heavier for what remained of a life folded into cloth. Behind her, horns called again, then stopped, replaced by distant barking laughter that carried in gusts and vanished. Time shredded. Cold climbed her calves, her spine, the back of her neck. She found a shallow gully and slid down it, using her shoulders when her feet failed, then crawled beneath a fallen pine where the wind thinned enough for 1 ragged breath. Think. Present tense now, because now is all that holds. I am alive. I have knife, comfrey, moonroot scrap, 1 flint capsule if it stayed dry. I have no firewood, no shelter, no pack. If I stop, I freeze. If I stand, they may see me. West means cliffs by dawn. South means patrol arcs. North means river ice. I choose west anyway. I choose the route that hurts and keeps moving. I choose 1 more minute, then another. She rose again, shaking so hard her teeth knocked. The storm deepened into near white blindness. She moved by feel. 1 hand on tree trunks, the other clamped over her bleeding wrist to slow the sting. Once, she thought she saw lantern light ahead and nearly cried with relief, then realized it was moonglow trapped in blowing crystals. Once, she heard a howl, and almost answered out of old habit before remembering she had no pack call to give. A dead pine appeared out of the white, split down the trunk by old lightning, roots clawing from an uplifted mound like frozen hands. Astrid made it to the lee side and collapsed against the bark. Her legs refused command, her lashes crusted with ice. She pressed both palms into her coat, trying to keep heat from leaking out through the ruined skin at her wrists. "This is where it ends," she whispered, voice eaten by wind. "Not in their hall. Here." The forest answered with a hush so sudden it felt deliberate. Then a shape detached from the storm. At first she saw only size, far too large for any border wolf she had ever treated, shoulders rolling beneath a coat black as river stone, snow catching and vanishing along his back. He came forward without hurry, each step soundless in the drifts, amber eyes fixed on her with an intensity that was not hunger and not fear. Ancient, alert, fiercely present. He stopped an arm's length away and turned broadside to the wind, placing his body between her and the open white, as if he had been waiting on that exact patch of frozen ground for the moment she fell. The wolf did not bare his teeth. He did not lower his head to scent for weakness. He simply stood, immense and still, taking the full violence of the wind while Astrid shivered in the pocket of shelter his body made. She had treated wolves all her adult life. She knew posture, warning, intent. This was none of the patterns she trusted. Predators circled, tested, closed. This one guarded. A gust drove needles of ice against her cheek, and she flinched. The wolf shifted his weight instantly, closing the narrow gap until the fur along his shoulder brushed her sleeve. Heat seeped through damp wool, startling against the brutal cold. He angled his head toward the western ridge, then looked back at her, waiting. "You want me to follow you?" she said, words cracking. His ears flicked once. Not impatience, confirmation. Astrid tried to stand and nearly folded in half when pain speared her ankle. The wolf moved in a blur, bracing his flank against her knees before she hit the ground again. She caught herself with both hands in his thick coat, breath hitching at the unreal density of him, at the steady thud beneath muscle and winter fur. "Fine," she whispered, swallowing fear like medicine. "West." He took one step. She limped after him. The storm thinned in uneven breaths as they moved through the trees, still vicious but less blinding. He chose paths she would never have seen. Narrow ledges shielded by basalt outcrops, wind-carved trenches between drifts, a creek crossing where ice held under his weight and somehow held under hers. Twice she stumbled. Twice he stopped and waited without turning, as if giving her dignity by refusing to watch her fail. Minutes stretched into a punishing rhythm of cold, pain, and stubborn motion. Her fingers lost sensation, her lungs burned. Yet the further they went, the fewer panic scents rode the air. No patrol smoke, no horn calls, no border taunts, only pine resin, distant stone, and the wolf's clean metallic winter scent anchoring each breath. Then the forest opened. A mountain rose out of blowing snow like the spine of something sleeping beneath the world, its lower face carved into terraces and fortified walls. Blue-white ward fires burned in iron braziers along the approach, steady despite the wind. Great timber gates banded in black steel stood recessed between two watchtowers, each carved with runes she did not recognize, but felt in her bones as old law. Frostborn territory, she realized with a jolt so sharp it made her sway. Not rumor, not map ink. Real. Dark shapes moved along the rampart. Wolves first, huge and alert, then figures in heavy cloaks with spears tipped in moonsteel. One sentry called out in a language older than border dialect, voice carrying over snow. The wolf beside Astrid answered with a single low sound that rolled across the courtyard approach like distant thunder. Everything above the gate went still. A horn sounded once, short and precise. Bolts thudded back. The left gate opened just enough to admit a wagon, and 3 warriors emerged in disciplined formation, not charging but ready. Their leader was a broad-shouldered woman with 2 braids bound in silver rings and a scar crossing her mouth. Her gaze fixed on Astrid, then snapped to the wolf at Astrid's side. She dropped to one knee in the snow so quickly the motion looked reflexive. "My alpha," she said, head bowed. "Orders?" Astrid stopped breathing for one whole beat. Not a patrol beast, not a rogue male. The alpha. The wolf stepped forward. Snow slid from his back in sheets. He looked from the kneeling warrior to Astrid, and whatever passed in that glance made the woman's expression shift from military focus to startled disbelief. "She is injured," the woman said carefully. "We can take her to the lower infirmary until council clearance is granted." The wolf turned his head toward her with quiet finality. The woman pressed her lips together and nodded once. "As you command. Sanctuary chamber, then." 2 more guards arrived with a fur-lined stretcher, approaching Astrid with obvious caution, not from cruelty but from uncertainty. She recoiled on instinct, hands rising to protect her wrists. "Do not touch me." The plea came out rougher than she intended. "Please." The woman with the scar met her eyes. "No one will force you here." It should have calmed her. Instead, it broke something raw open, because no one had said those words to her all night. Inside her own mind, the world narrowed again to the brutal, present-tense honesty she could not silence. "I am standing in a foreign gate with blood on my sleeves, and an alpha I do not know deciding whether I live. I should calculate leverage. I should ask treaty terms. I should keep my face empty and my pulse slower. But I am so tired. I am so cold. And this wolf put his body between me and the storm before I gave him my name. If this is a trap, it is the first one that looked like mercy. If this is kindness, I do not know how to hold it without flinching. Keep breathing. Keep your feet. Do not mistake safety for forever. Do not mistake fear for prophecy. One step, then another." She tried to take that next step and failed. Her injured ankle buckled cleanly this time. The woman surged forward, then halted when the wolf moved first. He came to Astrid's side and lowered himself, shoulder pressed against her hip in unmistakable offer. "Ride." Astrid stared at him, dazed by the absurdity and the care threaded through it. "You cannot expect me to—" He huffed warm air against her frozen fingers, impatient now, then glanced toward the gate where snow was already drifting deeper. A brief, disbelieving laugh escaped her. "This is mildly illegal somewhere." The scarred woman made a startled sound that might have been a choked laugh of her own, quickly hidden. "Only if he files a complaint." Astrid let the guards help guide her onto the wolf's broad back, clinging to his ruff with numb hands. He rose in one smooth motion, as controlled as a king mounting a dais, and carried her through the gate. Inside, Frostborn's stronghold was all stone, firelight, and disciplined movement. No one shouted. No one pointed. Wolves and humans alike paused, bowed either to the wolf beneath her or to the sight of him bearing an outsider through the heart of his fortress. The courtyard opened to a step descent cut into the mountain itself, with bridges linking terraces and carved channels carrying meltwater that steamed where it touched heated rock. By the time they reached the inner arch, Astrid's vision had begun to blur at the edges. She tasted iron and snow. Her grip slipped. The wolf stopped in a sheltered passage lit by blue runes set into the walls. He knelt, letting her slide down carefully to unsteady feet. Warriors formed a respectful perimeter, heads lowered. The scarred woman stepped close enough to catch Astrid if she fell, close enough to speak softly without the others hearing. "My name is Captain Sable," she said. "If he brought you in himself, no one here will lay a hand on you without consent." Astrid nodded once, not trusting her voice. She turned back toward the wolf. He was watching her with that same unbearable, deliberate focus from the dead pine. Snow melted along his coat in dark rivulets. A thin line of old scar cut across his muzzle, almost hidden by fur. His amber gaze held hers, and the corridor seemed to contract around the space between them. Then he shifted. There was no violent crack of bones, no grotesque contortion, only a rapid, controlled reweaving of form, fur drawing back into skin, spine lifting, limbs lengthening, massive wolf shape folding into a man with the same predatory stillness and the same eyes. He stood barefoot on cold stone, bare-chested despite the storm, runic scars burning faint gold over his shoulders and down his ribs like old lightning trapped under flesh. Astrid forgot to breathe. Heat slammed through her sternum so suddenly she gasped. A current raced down her arms into her fingertips, into the torn skin at her wrists. Not pain, exactly, not relief, but recognition so deep it felt carved. Cedar. Winter iron. The scent of him filled her lungs with the violent familiarity of home she had never lived in. The man swayed once, subtle but real, as if struck from within. His pupils widened, predator surfacing, and a sharp inhale cut through the corridor silence. "Mate," he said, voice roughened almost beyond speech. The word hit her harder than the cold had. Her instincts sharpened to a bright edge. Every sound separated cleanly. Brazier crackle, distant boots on stair, the hitch in Captain Sable's breathing, the thunder of her own pulse answering his like two drums finding one rhythm across a battlefield. Fear rose first, because the night had taught her what belonging could cost. Confusion followed, fierce and disorienting. Then an aching pull she did not have language for, toward him, toward warmth, toward the single impossible fact that her body knew him before her mind could argue. Captain Sable and the other guards stepped back in unspoken unison, retreating far enough to grant privacy without abandoning watch. The man dropped to one knee, not performative, not courtly theater, a warrior bracing through impact. His head lowered until his forehead touched hers. The contact was gentle, almost reverent, and it ignited another surge through the bond opening between them, thread after thread of sensation unspooling too fast to track. His restraint like a taut wire, his fury banked against whoever had hurt her, his wonder edged with a loneliness so ancient it made her chest ache. "I am Zephyr Frostborn," he said quietly, each word deliberate. "You are safe in my hall." Safe. The word should have been simple. In her, it detonated. Astrid's hands trembled at her sides. She wanted to step back and could not. She wanted to lean into him and did not dare. Her whole life had trained her to read symptoms, identify causes, apply treatment. Nothing in that discipline prepared her for this. If I accept this, I could lose everything again, she thought, present and merciless. If I refuse it, I lie to the one part of me that has not lied once tonight. He is power wrapped in winter, and I have seen what power does when it fears. But he asked nothing. He knelt. He put my consent before his claim in front of his warriors. My pulse keeps answering him. My breath keeps finding his scent. I am terrified. I am not turning away. She lifted one shaking hand and touched the inside of his wrist where one rune flared beneath skin. His eyes rose to hers, amber brightening as if dawn had found fire. Locked there, breath to breath, Astrid understood with frightening clarity that the border had not ended at stone markers behind her. It had followed her into this corridor and drawn a final line through the center of her life, and on the other side of it knelt the first being who had looked at her ruin and seen not curse, not burden, but his chosen. His chosen. The words struck her again in the silence that followed, not as possession but as recognition, and the force of it left her swaying on unsteady legs. Zephyr rose at once, one hand lifting as if to steady her, then stopping in the space between them when she flinched. "Astrid," he said, voice low enough that only she could hear it. "May I touch you?" No one had asked permission before touching her in chains. The memory flashed so hard she tasted iron. She nodded once. His fingers closed around her forearm with controlled care, never tightening beyond what was needed to keep her upright. "Captain Sable, Sanctuary Chamber. Call Healer Maris. No sedatives without my order." Sable's chin dipped. "At once, my alpha." They moved through the inner passage at a measured pace, Zephyr matching each uneven step she could manage, not pulling, not rushing, leaving space for refusal with every breath. The chamber they brought her to was small by fortress standards, but warmer than any room she had known in the border infirmary. Stone walls veined with blue runes, a low bed layered in fur blankets, a brazier burning moonwood that smelled faintly of cedar sap and clean smoke. Two women in healer gray entered, eyes alert, hands visible, waiting for her signal before they approached. Astrid sat on the edge of the bed and let them unlace her ruined sleeves. Silver burns ringed both wrists in angry, split crescents. One healer hissed under her breath. The other muttered, "Boundary cuffs," with a grief so blunt it made Astrid look away. Zephyr stood near the door like a carved shadow, enormous and still. Amber bled into his irises whenever pain drew a sound from her throat, then faded as he forced himself back from the edge of shift. When Healer Maris reached for a vial of sleep tincture, Zephyr spoke without raising his voice. "Not that one." Maris stiffened. "My alpha, fever and shock." "Not that one," Zephyr repeated. "It blunts consent. She decides what she takes." Astrid turned to him, startled. In the border pack, healers had to fight alphas for that argument and rarely won. Zephyr did not even glance at his own authority while giving it away. He looked only at her. "What do you want?" he asked. "My head clear," she said. "No dreamleaf. Willow for pain. Moonroot if fever spikes." He nodded once as if she had issued command. "You heard her." By the time the wounds were cleaned and wrapped, shaking had become violent. Heat climbed behind her eyes, then dropped, then climbed again. Fever. She tried to apologize to no one in particular and did not remember lying down. Voices blurred at the edges. At some point, a hand tucked the blanket higher around her shoulder, then withdrew before she could recoil. When she woke, gray morning light had begun to gather beyond the narrow slit window. Snow still hissed against stone outside. Her throat felt scraped raw. Her skin alternated between fire and ice. She pushed up on one elbow and froze. Zephyr sat at a side table in the same room, sleeves rolled, massive shoulders bent over a mortar and pestle as he ground moonroot into precise powder with a focus usually reserved for battlefield maps. Several opened jars lined the table in exact order. A kettle steamed beside him. He did not notice she was awake until she made a rough, involuntary sound. His head came up immediately. "Easy." She blinked hard, convinced fever had made a vision out of rank and exhaustion. "Are you making medicine?" "Yes." "You have healers." "I do." He resumed grinding, measured and patient. "I trust them with most things." "Most." "Not this." The answer carried no insult toward his staff, only a blunt truth anchored in old scars. He set the pestle down, tested the powder between thumb and finger, then added it to a cup of hot water with the care of someone diffusing a trap. Astrid watched his hands, calloused, steady. A thin white line over the right knuckle where something once cut deep. Warrior hands, not apothecary hands, moving with deliberate humility over her dosage chart. The absurdity slipped past her defenses before she could stop it. An Alpha King stirring medicinal paste looks mildly illegal. His mouth twitched, a near smile rough at the edges. "I survived wars. Your dosage charts concern me more." A laugh escaped her, weak and surprised, but real. It hurt her ribs and eased them in the same moment. He brought the cup to her, then paused when she recoiled from reflex more than intent. The pause was immediate. He lowered himself to one knee beside the bed so she would not have to tilt her head up to him. "May I?" he asked, offering the cup and, separately, his open palm. Astrid stared at that open hand. The room narrowed to the shape of a choice. In the hall of her former pack, choice had been theater. Here it sat in front of her, waiting. "You can," she whispered. He helped her drink, one careful sip at a time. When she coughed, he did not crowd her space. When she finished, he set the cup aside and reached for the blankets that had slipped from her shoulder, then stopped again. "Blanket?" he asked. She nodded, and he tucked fur around her with a gentleness that felt almost ceremonial. For a long moment neither spoke. Fire cracked softly in the brazier. Somewhere beyond the chamber walls, the fortress shifted into morning routine, boots and voices distant as another life. Then Zephyr said, still watching the blanket edge instead of her face, "If I cross a line, tell me. I will step back." She searched him, trying to find the manipulation she had been trained to expect in powerful men offering tenderness. She found tension instead, tightly leashed. He wanted proximity with a force she could feel along the bond like a storm held behind a gate. He chose restraint anyway. Inside her, thought unfurled in a hard, bright ribbon. I am lying in a stranger's stronghold with his mark waiting somewhere in the future, like a door I can already see. I should fear this more than I do. I should catalog every risk and keep my distance like law. But he has asked every time. He has given me water without demand, warmth without debt, medicine without control. This is what trust looks like at the beginning. Not grand vows, not fate as argument, but 1,000 small permissions where no one takes what is easy. I do not owe him belief yet. I can offer attention. I can offer one honest answer at a time. I can stay awake inside this moment and not run from it. "Why not let your healers do all of it?" she asked quietly. "If you trust them with most things." His gaze met hers. Ancient weariness moved under the gold in his eyes, then settled into resolve. "Because in my past, someone used a sleeping draft on a witness under my protection and called it mercy. I learned what neglect looks like when it wears polite hands. I will not repeat it with you." The admission landed heavier than confession, because he gave it without asking for pity. He stood, adjusted the kettle, and poured broth into a shallow bowl. "You need food. I might throw it at you." "Then aim for my left shoulder," he said dryly. "The right one still objects to old spear work." Against every expectation she had carried into the snow, Astrid slept again with a full stomach, wrapped in warmth she had consented to, and when she woke near evening he was still in the chair by the brazier, head bowed, not touching her, guarding the door. 3 days passed before she was strong enough to leave the sanctuary chamber without swaying. Frostborn's council hall was carved into the mountain heart, circular and severe, with 12 stone seats rising in tiers around a central floor inscribed with packed runes older than any pack border. Torches burned with smokeless blue flame. Elders from allied territories had arrived under winter banners, their scent signatures layered into a tense fog of pine oil, wolf musk, and political caution. Astrid stood at Zephyr's right, wrists bandaged, back straight by stubborn force. Captain Sable waited 2 paces behind her. Murmurs ran the room as elders took in the exile healer beside the Alpha King. Some looked curious, others looked as if she carried plague. Elder Varric of Grey Hollow rose first, robes heavy with silver braid. By interpack custom, the accused must be surrendered to neutral custody for ritual questioning. The phrase hit like sleet. Neutral custody had been the Border Council's favorite lie before they chained her. Zephyr did not move. "Denied." Varric's jaw tightened. You shelter a suspected infanticide and deny process. She has not been convicted under lawful hearing. Your attachment compromises judgment. The word attachment snapped through the chamber like a whip. Several elders shifted, scenting scandal. Astrid felt heat crawl up her neck, humiliation and anger braided tight. She opened her mouth, but Zephyr lifted one hand slightly, not to silence her, to ask if she wanted him to speak first. She gave the smallest nod. He stepped forward into the center rune, drew a narrow blade from his belt, and cut his palm in one clean line. Blood welled dark and bright. With deliberate strokes, he traced a full circle on the stone around Astrid's position, his blood igniting against the carved channels until a crimson gold ring flared to life. Gasps moved through the tears. Ancient rite of sanctuary, Zephyr said, voice carrying to the farthest seat. Witness now, bound now. Any who cross this line challenge me personally under war law. A counselor from the eastern tier spat the word like poison. She is poison. Zephyr turned, and something feral looked out through his eyes for one sharpened heartbeat before control settled back into place. She is under my protection, and your fear is not law. Silence followed, thick and charged. Varric tried again, more cautious. Alpha Frostborn, if every ruler shielded mates from inquiry. Astrid stepped to the edge of the bloodline circle, meeting Varric's stare. Question me here, then. In open council, under witness. I will answer anything about Morel's treatment. Every herb, every measure, every chart they seized. Varric hesitated. That hesitation told its own story. He wanted surrender, not truth. Zephyr lowered the blade, blood still dripping from his hand. Produce evidence, and we proceed by law. Demand a body for your panic, and we are done. No elder crossed the line. Questions came, brittle and probing, about doses and timing, about who entered the border infirmary that day, about why Astrid had no remaining records. She answered each one with healer precision, naming tincture ratios and sediment color, identifying where wolfsbane contamination would show if tested by neutral apothecary fire. As she spoke, resistance in the hall shifted from certainty to discomfort. Not exoneration yet, but a crack. At last, Varric sat down, expression carved shut. Temporary stay of demand, he said. Pending forensic review. Not justice, not even close, but not a hand on her throat. As counselors filed out in rustling waves of fur and wool, Astrid stayed inside the fading blood circle, staring at the glowing line Zephyr had drawn from his own palm. She had seen men posture with protection before, declaring women under their shield while tightening cages around them. This felt different in structure and intent. He had not spoken over her when she chose to answer. He had given her the floor and made the room safe enough to use it. Zephyr approached the circle boundary and stopped just outside. Do you want me inside? The question undid her faster than any threat had. Yes, she said. He stepped through only after she spoke, and when he reached for her hand, he waited until she offered it. His cut palm was warm against her bandaged wrist, grounding, steady. Her guard did not vanish. It lowered by one careful measure, like a gate unbarred at dawn after a long siege, opening just enough to let hope cross without letting danger rush in. Hope crossed first as paperwork. Captain Sable intercepted them at the council hall threshold with 3 sealed packets and a strip of cracked leather taken from a courier pouch. Snow still clung to her braids. She had come in at a run and had not bothered to hide it. 2 messages from external contacts, she said to Zephyr, then looked to Astrid with deliberate inclusion. 1 from Riverglass Apothecary under neutral charter, 1 from our border watch at East Marker 7. The leather was on a dead runner found in the lower pass. Zephyr's hand tightened once around Astrid's, then released so she could choose whether to stay. She stayed. They moved into a side chamber lined with old maps and treaty tablets. Maris arrived within minutes, along with archivist Thorne, who handled coded correspondence for Frostborn law. Sable broke the first seal and laid out a single page with ash-gray staining at the edge, where reagent fire had touched it. Maris read aloud. Sample residue taken from ceramic cup shard, source listed as Morel Valewood Private Quarters. Findings: wolfsbane alkaloid, present in concentration sufficient to induce uterine collapse. Secondary trace of bitterbind oil, used to mask scent in heated liquids. The room went quiet enough for Astrid to hear the fire snap. Zephyr looked at her. Not triumphant, not relieved, just intent. You were right. She stared at the script until letters blurred. Vindication should have felt clean. Instead, she felt anger arrive like delayed weather, huge and cold. Someone had mixed that tincture with skill. Someone had known exactly what would happen. Bitterbind burns off if boiled too long, she said. Whoever did this dosed late, close to serving. Archivist Thorne lifted the cracked leather strip. Then this matters. He set it under lamp glass. A faint sigil, nearly invisible, surfaced in dark red lines, a split fang wrapped in chain runes. Astrid had never seen it, but Zephyr's expression sharpened into recognition that made the chamber feel smaller. Ashen Creed, he said. Maris swore softly. Sable muttered. I thought they were broken after the Hollow March trials. Zephyr shook his head. Scattered, not broken. They preach bloodline purity, call healers corruptors, and brandmate bonds political disease. His voice flattened on the last words, as if reciting a doctrine he despised by memory. Their surviving cells answer to one strategist now, Owen Shadowfang. The name landed with the weight of an old wound in the room. Even Thorne, who rarely showed expression, went still. Sable opened the second message. East Marker 7 reports 2 patrol pairs rotated last month with forged transfer writs. Both pairs vanished after posting. Replacement wolves carried Border Authority marks, but their scent signatures were scrubbed with iron resin. Our watch captain suspects planted loyalists. Astrid saw the shape of it all at once, and the clarity was nauseating. Frame the healer. Purge trust in medicine. Seed patrols with false authority. Force panic at the border where treaties were already brittle. They drove me west on purpose, she said. The horns. The fan pattern. It wasn't rage, it was root control. Zephyr's gaze locked on hers. Toward no-pack land. Toward a kill zone. Or a capture line, Thorne added. He slid another folded sheet from the dead courier pouch and passed it to Zephyr. Cipher broke half an hour ago. Read line 3. Zephyr read silently, jaw hardening. Then he handed the page to Astrid. Convergence. Solstice. Blood of the accused healer to anchor severance right. Bond threads across allied packs will fail at moon apex. Frostborn isolated. Crown without tether. Her pulse thudded in her throat. They want me alive. For ritual use, Maris said, voice gone thin. Sable braced her palms on the table. Then they cannot breach this fortress. They may not need to, Zephyr said. If border patrols are compromised, if council factions believe the forgeries, we get dragged into treaty traps. Any extraction raid across disputed lines becomes an act of war. Owen wins whether he takes Astrid or makes me look like a tyrant protecting her. Astrid forced herself to keep reading. At the bottom, in a different hand, a note had been added in hurried strokes. Ledgers prepared. Healer records to be circulated before convergence. Name the wolf before they name us. She lifted her own satchel from where Sable had placed it near the door and pulled out the damp, salvaged treatment charts she had carried through the storm. Pages wrinkled, ink bled, still legible. Compare these to whatever they circulate, she said. My notation style has 3 marks they won't copy correctly. Dozing lines slant left when I write under pressure. I use spruce char ink in winter, not soot black. And I always flag pregnancy care with a crescent stitch in the margin. Thorne was already nodding. Distinctive enough for forensic script review. We send copies to every treaty pack tonight, Zephyr said. Not as plea, as evidence. By the second night after the council hearing, Ravens had gone out under Frostborn's seal to 12 allied territories, carrying Astrid's authentic charts, apothecary findings, and the Ashen Creed sigil proof wrapped in legal language no elder could dismiss as mating frenzy. The pressure did not lessen, it refined. Astrid was moved from sanctuary chamber to a guarded suite near the inner infirmary, and she spent long hours beside Maris cataloging antidotes, stabilizing winter stores, and training younger healers to detect bitterbind masking. Work steadied her hands, but every corridor now held 2 soldiers at minimum, and every meal was tested twice in her line of sight. Even safety had edges. Zephyr appeared without warning and without spectacle, sometimes at dawn with intelligence reports tucked under his arm, sometimes near midnight carrying a cup of broth he pretended had been left over from command table rations. He kept asking the same quiet questions in new forms. Do you want company? Do you want silence? Do you want me to stay? Want was no longer a simple category. Inside herself, she tracked him the way she tracked a patient recovering from deep injury, watching for consistency, for hidden fever, for signs that care would curdle into control. I am still learning his weather, she thought, present tense and unsparing. He is not gentle by nature, he is deliberate by discipline. There is a difference, and it matters. I feel him through the bond at odd hours, a low pull behind my ribs when he is angry in another room, a quieter pulse when he sleeps too little and calls it strategy. I could drown in this if I stop naming it. Attraction is not surrender. Fear is not wisdom by default. I can move slowly and still move toward him. One evening, she found him in the Western Archive staring at a treaty map lit by a single rune lamp, shoulders rigid, gold flickering in his eyes, as if his wolf paced directly beneath skin. He handed her a report before she asked. External contact outcome, he said. Grey Hollow received our forensic packet and returned this. The letter was courteous in form and rotten in substance. Chain of custody disputed. Riverglass sample deemed politically contaminated. Request renewed for Astrid's transfer to neutral custody at Solstice Convergence for collective adjudication. She would vanish en route, Zephyr said. Astrid folded the paper carefully, resisting the urge to tear it in half. Then we do not travel under their escort. We may have to travel anyway. He tapped a circle on the map, an ancient assembly site straddling old borders. If we refuse Convergence attendance, Owen claims we are hiding proof. If we attend, he has a field of proxies to exploit. She studied the terrain lines, broken ridges, abandoned stone circle, 2 river cuts, 6 approach paths. He needs a ritual structure already keyed to pack magic. That circle would do it. Zephyr looked at her sharply. You think he chose the site already? I think he has been choosing every site since Morel drank that cup. 3 days passed before the first overt move came. A relief convoy bound for Frostborn's lower villages was hit in narrow pass country by men wearing treaty patrol cloaks and carrying counterfeit boundary stamps. They did not loot food. They stole 1 crate only: moon root, silver thread, and binding salts used in ceremonial warding. Sable brought back a broken spear haft from the skirmish, and the same split-fang sigil had been carved beneath the grip, where only the wielder would see it. They are building a right kit, Maris said grimly. At supper, Zephyr barely touched his plate. His control remained impeccable, but tension rode him like another body. Astrid finally set down her spoon and said, You are deciding whether to lock me behind 6 doors. I am deciding whether to keep you breathing, Those are not opposite goals. His expression shifted, frustration and care colliding. If I cage you, Owen's narrative gains teeth. If I leave you visible, I paint a target over your heart. She held his gaze. Then we build a third option. Visible, mobile, hard to isolate. And we stop acting as if my role is to survive quietly while everyone else moves the board. The words hung between them, bright and dangerous. Zephyr exhaled slowly, then nodded once. Joint planning at first bell. You, me, Sable, Thorn, Maris. Good. His hand moved across the table and stopped short of hers, waiting. She closed the distance herself. Warmth spread up her wrist where their fingers met, not the frantic shock of first bond recognition, something steadier and more frightening in its own way. Chosen, she remembered, and chose back by inches. The strike came under moonless cloud, 2 nights before the winter solstice convergence. They were in the lower infirmary triage room, reviewing travel antidote packs for the delegation route, when the outer alarm gave one clipped note and died mid-sound. Not failed. Cut. Sable's voice hit the corridor a heartbeat later, hard and sharp. Inner door seal. Now. Maris moved to bar the medicine vault. Astrid reached for the emergency bell rope and found it severed at shoulder height, fibers still warm as if cut moments earlier. A smell slid under the infirmary door then, sweet and metallic, wrong in a way her body recognized before her mind did. Iron resin, she said. Scent scrub. The first blast was not fire but pressure. A concussive ward break that slammed dust from the ceiling and drove everyone sideways. Blue runes along the floor guttered out in a chain, one after another, as if a hand pinched each light dead. Through the haze came boot falls in disciplined cadence, too synchronized for raiders, and a voice amplified by ritual metal. By neutral order, surrender the accused healer for transfer. Thorn, blood at his temple, shouted from the doorway. That seal is forged. Do not answer. Steel rang. A guard cried out somewhere beyond sight. Sable crashed backward into the room with 2 enemies on her, took one down with a pivot strike, and yelled, "Decoys at North Gate! Real breach at Medical Wing!" They came for her. Zephyr arrived in partial shift, claws out, amber burning through smoke, and the air thickened with his fury. He cut through the first wave without losing formation discipline, driving attackers back from Astrid's position rather than chasing kills. "Fallback route C," he ordered. "Move her to the inner lift." Astrid moved with Maris toward the service corridor, heart hammering, mind counting exits. 4 steps from the threshold, the floor sigils ignited beneath her boots in a pattern she had not seen because it had been painted under fresh lime wash, a capture lattice keyed to healer blood. Light snapped upward in a hex of pale chains and locked around her like frozen lightning. She hit the barrier with both palms. It held. Zephyr spun at the sound she made and lunged, but 3 spears crossed at once, silver-tipped and rune-etched to disrupt Alpha Aura at close range. He tore one aside, took the second through his sleeve, kept coming. Sable felled another attacker and reached for Astrid through the lattice, fingers inches away, blocked by the same hard shimmer. From the corridor shadow beyond the broken door, a tall man stepped forward in dark winter leathers, streaks of gray at his temples. Face almost gentle except for the satisfaction in his eyes. He removed a glove and touched the split-fang sigil at his wrist in mock courtesy. "Owen Shadowfang," he said. Astrid went cold clear through. He looked at her as if assessing inventory. "You were worth the effort." Zephyr's voice dropped into a register that made the stone vibrate. "Touch her, and I end you." Owen smiled faintly. "That is the treaty dilemma, is it not? If you tear this wing apart to reach her, witnesses will carry one story to Convergence. Mad Alpha slaughters neutral officers to hide his mate's crimes." He gestured, and 2 more infiltrators rolled in a brazier frame already carved with runes. If you hold your honor, I leave with what I came for. Astrid shoved power into the lattice again, searching for flaws, for anchors, for anything she could reverse. The pattern drank her effort and brightened, critical. The word landed with absolute precision in her healer mind. No panic now. Assessment. Owen inclined his head toward the corridor where night yawned black beyond the breach. Choose quickly, Frostborn. Moon Apex waits for no one. And the lattice began to move, dragging Astrid toward the dark. Its light bands did not slide over stone so much as carve a channel through it, hauling her boots across shattered tile and into the breached corridor while Owen's men closed ranks around the moving prison. Zephyr hit them like a storm held too long behind a gate, claws flashing in tight, controlled arcs that disabled without wasting motion. But every time he surged toward her, two more treaty-cloaked infiltrators drove silvered spearheads into his path and forced him to choose between pursuit and the guards at his back. He chose his people. He always chose his people. The resulting tension tore through Astrid with nearly physical force because his restraint kept him honorable and let Owen's trap keep working. Captain Sable slammed her axe haft into the lattice edge, testing structure. Blue sparks spat and died. "Anchor points are mobile," she shouted. "Runes are feeding off her pulse." "Then break line of sight," Maris called, already throwing powdered salt and moonroot at the floor glyphs trailing behind the moving cage. One line fizzled out, 3 relit. Owen walked backward ahead of the lattice, gaze fixed on Astrid with precise calculation. "Neutral transfer protocol witnessed by armed officers," he said, voice carrying beyond the smoke. "Any interference will be entered at convergence as unlawful seizure." "You forged every seal in this wing," Thorne snarled from where two soldiers dragged him clear of the doorway. Owen's smile never reached his eyes. "Prove it before Moon Apex." He lifted 2 fingers. The infiltrators flanking Astrid drove iron hooks into rings that had risen from the floor beneath the lattice and, with a synchronized pull, redirected her down a service ramp cut straight into the mountain's outer face. Freezing wind knifed in. Snow exploded sideways through the opening where the ward wall had been blown apart. Below, waiting in the dark, stood a rune sled harnessed to 4 gray wolves with resin-muted scent and blank eyes. Zephyr's roar shook frost from the arch stones. Astrid twisted, planting her palms against the lattice again, forcing herself to assess instead of panic. The pattern pulsed in 6 repeating nodes. 2 were keyed to her blood, 2 to motion, 2 to command glyphs stamped on Owen's gloves. Not a cage meant to hold forever then. A transport engine designed for speed. Inside her, thought narrowed into brutal present tense clarity. Breathe. Count. 6 nodes. 2 vulnerable if I redirect current from inside. Pain means contact. Contact means pathway. I am not cargo unless I agree to remain cargo. I cannot outmuscle this. I can corrupt it. Need a conductive medium. Blood works. Mine already in the matrix. Keep your head. Keep your name. Keep one choice alive. By the time they reached the sled, snow had swallowed most sounds behind them except steel strikes, and Zephyr's command voice cutting through chaos. "Signal all treaty packs. Convergence site. Full witness call." Sable's answering horn split the night. 3 sharp notes, then 2. "Emergency law summons." Owen heard it, and his expression tightened for the first time. "Load her." They locked the lattice frame to the sled and launched down the mountain cut, runners hissing over ice. Astrid's shoulders slammed iron once, twice, then settled into the punishing rhythm of high-speed descent. On either side, dead pines blurred black against snow. The moon was still hidden behind thick cloud, but the horizon ahead glimmered with firelight where the old border circle lay open to the sky. They were not hiding this. They were staging it. By the time the sled burst into the abandoned stone circle, torches already burned in a rough outer ring, and wolves from 6 territories stood in uneasy clusters, summoned by conflicting orders and the same horn code they could not ignore. Elder Varric was there in heavy gray wool, flanked by guards who looked uncertain whether to defend him or each other. Riverglass envoys stood near a supply wagon, clutching their charter tablets like shields. No one moved when Owen's men dragged Astrid's lattice into the center sigil. That paralysis was the point. Make it look procedural, until the blade was already in. Owen climbed the bloodstone platform and raised both arms. Witnesses of convergence, we proceed under emergency purity review. The accused healer's blood will test whether mate bond corruption has spread through allied lines. Liar, Astrid said, voice raw and carrying farther than she expected. He ignored her. Two Creed enforcers rolled in the stolen brazier frame from Frostborn's convoy and set it over the central rune. Chains etched with split fang marks dropped from its rim, humming as they drank heat from the air. Astrid felt the first tug through the mate bond then, not from Zephyr's direction, but from everywhere at once. Faint twangs like harp strings pulled out of tune across the valley. Panic rippled through the crowd. Wolves grabbed for their chests. One elder staggered. Owen nicked Astrid's forearm with a ritual blade through the lattice gap, collected 3 dark drops in a shallow silver bowl, and poured them into the brazier. Flame shot white, then green-black at the core. There, he said softly, now they will watch what she is. A howl answered from the northern ridge, huge and furious, followed by the thunder of boots and paws descending in disciplined formation. Zephyr hit the outer ring with Frostborn guard at his back. Half shifted, rune scars blazing under skin, his gaze feral with contained rage. He did not charge the center blind. He split his force in 2 with one hand signal. Sable left flank. Maris and Thorn to witness platform. Shield wall to protect neutral envoys. Strategy over vengeance, even now. Astrid! He shouted. Stay behind my line when I break it. The lattice shuddered as his aura struck it. Cracks of red light raced across 2 nodes, then sealed. Owen laughed. He still thinks he can rescue you without becoming me. Then he began the severance chant in old dialect, each word hammering the bond threads tighter. Around the ring, paired wolves dropped to one knee, gasping as invisible links strained. Zephyr took 1 step toward the platform and jerked as if a hook had caught behind his sternum. Astrid felt it too. Fire in her veins, pressure behind her eyes, a tearing vibration that wanted to split connection from connection until every pack stood spiritually alone. No, not while she could still choose. She dragged her hand to her boot seam, where the small root-cutting knife she had hidden the night of exile still rode flat against the leather, an old habit no tribunal had managed to strip from her. With careful pressure, she opened her palm, pressed blood straight into the nearest cracked lattice node, and spoke the first counter-vow that had surfaced in memory from her apprenticeship to old border texts no one valued until crisis. By willing hand, not stolen vein. By witness, not concealment. The lattice faltered. One chain dropped slack. Zephyr saw and lunged for the opening. Astrid, hold position. She met his gaze through sparks and snow and shook her head once. I cannot. She drove both hands into the failing seam, forced space enough to step through, and crossed from his guard line into the inner sigil by deliberate choice. Gasps tore around the circle. Owen's chant stumbled. This rite can reverse, Astrid said, louder now, blood running down her wrist into the carved channels. Cursework is a river. It can be turned. It will kill you, Zephyr ground out, 1 step from the sigil edge, held back by 2 Creed spears and his own terror. Then trust me. She knelt at the central rune, flattened her bleeding palm over the cut stone, and gave the countervow in full old tongue, the words rough in her mouth yet truer with each line. Heat punched up her arm like molten wire. Every corrupted thread Owen had cast into the brazier found her first, then bent, then snapped toward their source. The outer torches blew horizontal. Snow lifted from the ground in a spinning white wall. arrows flew from the Creed's rear line toward her exposed back. Zephyr shifted fully and intercepted two in his shoulder armor, then tore through the archers with Captain Sable at his flank, their movements brutal and clean. Maris dragged three collapsing elders behind a wagon while shouting dosage orders to Riverglass medics. Thorne seized Owen's ledger satchel from the platform rail and hurled it to neutral clerks, yelling, "Check the ink! Check the seals now!" By the time moonlight broke through the cloud bank, the entire circle had become a living circuit, runes blazing blue-white instead of sickly green. Owen screamed and broke from the altar, silver spear in hand, face stripped of calm. He vaulted down the platform steps and drove the point straight at Astrid's throat. She rose into it, caught the shaft with both hands inches from her skin, and let the healing current she had spent a lifetime shaping flood forward, not to mend, but to purge. Light detonated along the spear length. Metal fractured into burning shards that scattered harmlessly across snow. Owen stumbled back, stunned. "What are you?" "A healer," she said, voice shaking with effort and certainty. "Not your weapon." Zephyr hit him a heartbeat later, slamming him onto the bloodstone in partial shift, claws pinning coat and flesh without striking a killing blow. Owen fought like a cornered wolf, spitting snow and rage, one hand reaching for a concealed blade at his boot. Zephyr's teeth bared. "You murdered Morel. You framed her healer. You broke treaty law on every border in this valley." Owen's laugh came cracked and wild. "Bloodlines end tonight." "No," Astrid said, stepping to the platform edge as power still coursed through the broken circle. "Lies do." She swept her cut palm through the air and drew from the fractured sigil the one element Owen had not accounted for. Living frost runes, responsive to witness and consent instead of domination. They rose like pale vines of light, wrapped his wrists, throat, and chest, and sealed with a sharp crystalline tone. His next curse died soundless. The runes drank his voice, then flared outward into memory sigils above the stone. Images burst across the snow-dark air for every pack to see. Owen bribing border patrol with forged writs, bitterbind oil poured into a healer cup, split fang marks branded beneath treaty cloaks, fabricated ledgers copied from stolen charts with wrong ink and wrong notation. Elder Varric swore under his breath. Riverglass envoys stared, stricken, then began recording witness statements on the spot. Thorne held up the seized ledger beside Astrid's original damp chart. Distinctive crescent stitch absent. Spruce char mismatch confirmed. Fraud under charter law. The crowd shifted as one organism from uncertainty to verdict. Zephyr eased pressure on Owen's chest only enough to make law audible, then spoke in the formal cadence of ruling sentence. Owen Shadowfang, by witnessed crimes against bonded law, treaty fraud, ritual assault, and murder conspiracy, you are stripped of rank, severed from pack claim, and exiled to the Void Barrens under guard. Any territory sheltering you forfeits covenant protection. He looked to Astrid, waiting for her final word. She held Owen's gaze until he dropped it. "No execution in my name." Zephyr nodded once. "So ordered." Sable stepped forward with iron restraints etched by neutral clerks in plain view. She locked them over the frost runes, and this time no one called restraint mercy. It was accountability, public and irreversible. Around the ring, wolves who had arrived prepared for political theater now stood in a stunned quiet as the severance tremor faded from their chests and true bond threads steadied again, visible only in the way mates reached for each other and found skin, pulse, breath. Astrid swayed when the last rune dimmed. Zephyr caught her forearm and waited for permission in his eyes, even while blood ran down his temple and snow melted in his hair. She gave the smallest nod and leaned, just enough to stay standing as Dawn's first pale line touched the border stones beyond the circle. Zephyr did not move her until Maris reached them and confirmed, with brisk healer hands, that Astrid's pulse had steadied, and the cut in her palm was clean enough to bind. Around them, Law replaced chaos in visible steps. Thorn logged the seized ledger satchel, the cracked courier leather, the forged transfer writs, and the carved spear haft into neutral custody under Riverglass seal. Sable supervised Owen's restraints as 4 cross-pack wardens fixed him to an exile sledge marked for the Void Baron's route, and when Elder Varric tried to challenge procedure, Riverglass invoked charter priority and shut him down in front of every witness. By full daylight, statements were taken at the stone circle itself, including the Bitterbind finding, the notation mismatch on forged healer ledgers, and the route control horns from the night Astrid had been driven out. The ravens Zephyr had sent were answered by midday with 4 immediate endorsements and 3 cautious holds, but none denied the evidence after the memory sigils were witnessed on open record. The strange sweet metal smell in the infirmary breach, the severed bell rope, the dead alarm line, all of it entered the file. When the last witness quill was set aside, Zephyr touched Astrid's bandaged hand. "Come with me." He led her up the eastern rise above the circle, where snow had already begun to soften into wet silver under a clearing sky. The wind was gentler there, meltwater threaded between old stones in thin, bright lines. Below, soldiers still moved in disciplined arcs, but distance turned the noise into a low hum and gave them something close to privacy. Zephyr stopped beneath a bent cedar and faced her fully. Blood cleaned from his temple, shoulder armor removed, rune scars dim except where emotion drew light through them. His control was intact, his restraint was not coldness, it was devotion in hard form. "Astrid." His voice roughened on her name. "I can wait as long as you need, I can wait years, but I will not take this step by silence or assumption. Do you want to be marked by me now, as my mate before law and moon? With full right to refuse." The question settled into her bones with more force than any command could have. She looked at him, at the man who had stood between her and storm, between her and council panic, between her and his own rage when vengeance would have been easy. Then she looked at herself in the shape of this moment. No chains, no tribunal script, no one speaking over her. Inside, her thoughts came clear and immediate. This is the border again, but this time it is mine to name. I am not being traded, hidden, or rescued into another cage. I am choosing. I want him. I want the bond fully opened, not as fate's accident, but as my answer. I have been called curse, burden, poison. He called me safe first, then asked what I wanted. That is the life I can build from. She stepped closer until their breaths met in the cold air. With steady hands, she moved her hair aside and bared the curve where neck met shoulder. Her gaze never left his. "Yes," she said. "Mark me." His eyes burned amber, predator, and reverence braided together. "Say stop at any point." "I will." He cupped her jaw with one hand, thumb resting lightly near her ear, and bent his head. She felt the brush of his breath first, then the precise pressure of his teeth at the shoulder curve. The bite landed clean, sharp enough to force a gasp. Pain flashing bright and immediate. For one heartbeat, it was only that. Heat. Pressure. The raw fact of skin opening. Then the bond surged, the pain transformed as if a locked channel had broken open. Warmth rushed from the mark through her chest, down her spine, into every place fear had held clenched for months. Not numbness, not erasure, integration. She felt him in layered currents, his fierce protectiveness. Yes, but also the quiet disciplines beneath it, the old betrayal he had named in fragments, the relentless choice to ask and wait and ask again. In return, her own history spilled toward him unhidden. The infirmary nights, the exile snow, the humiliating disbelief in the council hall, and the stubborn core that had never stopped saying, "I am still a healer." He drew back at once, lips resting against her skin as if honoring an altar rather than a claim. "Mine," he whispered, the word trembling with wonder rather than possession. She touched the new mark, breath unsteady, then slid her hand to his throat and felt his pulse hammering there. "Yours," she answered, "and you are mine." He gave a broken, disbelieving laugh, then stilled when she rose onto her toes and bared her own teeth at the line between his neck and collar. "My turn," she said. His breath caught. "Astrid." "Consent." "Yes," he said instantly, voice gone raw. "Yes, mate." She bit him where muscle met bone, careful and deliberate, enough to mark, enough to seal. His body shuddered under her hands, not from pain alone but from the bond snapping fully into reciprocity. Gold thread light flared between their chests, visible even in daylight shadow, weaving through his rune scars and the healer marks along her wrists until both patterns answered each other in one luminous lattice. The world narrowed to pulse and breath and the fierce quiet after a storm breaks. "Mine," she whispered against his skin. "Yours," he returned, forehead dropping to hers. "Mate," they said together, and the word settled. For a long while they only held each other, bodies braced close, the new mind link no longer a jagged surge but a steady current. She could feel where he ended and she began, and also the bridge between, open by consent on both sides. Below them, a cheer rose from the circle when someone noticed the bond light, then another. Then the sound spread across packs that had arrived ready for fracture and found, instead, a witnessed union built in law. By the second evening after convergence, the Great Hall of Frostborn stood full under every treaty banner willing to sign the revised covenant. Riverglass presented final forensic certification in person, confirming the original apothecary report and chain integrity of all collected evidence. Thorne read the complete docket aloud. Forged patrol rotations, falsified ledgers, stolen warding supplies, infiltrator seals, and sworn testimony from Border Beta Rellen's former apprentice Tomas, who admitted he had seen Rellen seize Astrid's winter charts before the exile sentence and had stayed silent out of fear. Astrid heard the line, absorbed it, and let it rest where it belonged, in record, not in her throat. Caro and Rellen were stripped by Border Review Tribunal under multipack oversight. Their appeals were heard and denied on evidence, not panic. Varric kept his seat only after public censure and formal apology entered into charter minutes. Owen's exile was confirmed at dusk by mirror sigil from the Baron's gate. No contact, no rank, no voice returned. Then the hall shifted from judgment to recognition. Sable struck her spear butt once on stone for silence. Maris carried forward the sanctuary charter tablet, newly cut with the law Zephyr had bled into being. No accused wolf surrendered without open evidence hearing and consent-safe healer oversight. Zephyr took the tablet, turned, and knelt before Astrid on the central rune in front of every elder, guard, and witness. "I claim no ownership over you," he said, voice carrying to the last tier. "I claim partnership before Pack and Moon. Astrid Valewood Frostborn, will you rule beside me as High Luna, with equal authority over Interpack medicine and justice review?" She placed her palm over his marked collar line, then offered him her shoulder mark in answer. "Yes, I will." When they rose together, the hall bowed. At first light the next morning, Astrid stood on the rebuilt boundary wall where she had once been discarded, now ringed with wardstones bearing the new refuge sigil. Sable had accepted command as first warden of the border haven. Maris had taken charge of its healing wing and training hall. Thorne had moved the recovered charts, forged ledgers, and sigil evidence into a public archive chamber so no council could bury proof again. The dead pine site was marked as protected ground, not cursed ground. Zephyr stepped beside her in wolf form, massive and black against the paling sky, and she answered in her own shift, silver dark coat lifting in the dawn wind. They stood shoulder to shoulder on the stone line, watching gates open for arrivals seeking sanctuary instead of fleeing it. No horns hunted, no chains waited. The border still existed, but it no longer meant banishment. It meant promise, guarded by two wolves who had chosen each other before fate, and then built a home strong enough to choose others too.